Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe Relation Tales. I asked the hotel worker to give the divorce letter to my wife in her room. She didn't know it, but that was the last time she would have me in her life, and I didn't plan to be there to see her reaction. After months of doubt, sleepless nights, and lies, I finally found the courage to do what I needed to do. I didn't know how she would feel when she read the letter. Sad, angry, or guilty, but it didn't matter. I had already made my choice, and that was the only thing keeping me going. The letter was simple and clear, like a sharp cut. I imagined her face when she opened it and saw the cold, formal words that began with her full name. I know everything. Those few words held all the weight of her betrayal, confirming that our marriage was over. The letter was my silent goodbye, ending a bond she had broken long before I signed my name. There was no long explanation or angry yelling. Just one hard truth. She cheated, and I couldn't keep pretending anymore. From the start, I had my suspicions. The messages she hid, the whispered calls, the secret smiles when she thought no one noticed. For a while, I tried to ignore it, hoping I was just imagining things, and that we could talk and fix it. But I knew it was more than that. The small lies were just the beginning, and the deeper I looked, the worse it got. The moment that destroyed any hope was when I saw her leaving a hotel building in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. Dressed smartly, like she was going on a date, but with the kind of smile on her face that she hadn't shown me in months. She laughed. He laughed in a way I could barely remember, as if his presence gave him something I could no longer offer. I followed her at a distance, feeling each step heavy in my chest, until I saw her meet another man in the lobby. They didn't hesitate. She walked straight into his arms, as if that was what she should have done all along. And I stood there, watching it all, unable to move, unable to breathe. So this is how it ends, I asked myself as I watched them walk across the lobby, laughing together. And in that moment, I realized there was nothing more to say, nothing to save. She chose to lie, she chose to cheat, and she chose to live a life that didn't include the truth about who she was or what our marriage meant. When I finally left that hotel, I was no longer the same. Something inside me had changed forever, like a blade that had been sharpened beyond repair. I decided to act quickly. There was no reason to prolong that suffering. That same night, I contacted a lawyer and prepared everything for the divorce. I asked for it to be discreet, something that would happen without scandals, without public confrontations. I didn't want fights or heated arguments. I just wanted her to know that I knew. She knew that from that moment on, our lives would go in different directions. I wanted to see the shock on her face, as a final gift to myself before I disappeared from her life. But there was something she didn't know, something I found out while getting ready for the divorce. As I packed my things to leave the house and started looking over the finances, I came across something that made me stop. It was a job offer for her, one she had been working toward for years. It would take her to another state, far from everything and everyone, far from me. It felt like a punch to the gut. She was planning to move on, start a new life, maybe even with her lover. It was as if I was the only one in the marriage without an escape plan. I sent the divorce letter to the hotel where she was staying, without her knowing I was aware of her plans. I needed to see her react. I needed to understand what that betrayal meant for her. When I received a message from the receptionist confirming that the letter had been delivered, I allowed myself a moment of bitter satisfaction. But she wasn't prepared for what came next. A few days later, when I had already left home, a call from her took me by surprise. "We need to talk," she said, her voice broken, as if she was struggling to control herself. Against all my expectations, she looked desperate. "Please, can we meet? I can explain." She repeated that last sentence several times, as if she could hold on to it to keep from sinking. And it was then that I realized that maybe there was something more, something I didn't yet know. Something that made her hesitate in following through with the plans she had for the future. What would she say on that date? What justification could there be for such a blatant betrayal? And why now, after everything? Was she still trying to explain herself? She always had all the answers rehearsed, all the excuses ready. But this time it felt different. For the first time, she sounded uncertain, like she was really scared. What if there was a truth that she was hiding from everyone, including her lover? something that could completely change the course of everything. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had been too quick to make the decision to walk away. But that thought quickly faded because I knew nothing could excuse the pain she caused. I had already made up my mind. But what if, instead of escaping, I was walking into an even bigger trap she had set? She wanted to meet, but this time I wouldn't be caught off guard. If she thought she could control things again, she was wrong. I was ready to find out how deep her lies went and what was really behind her uncertain tone. But the real question was I ready to face the truth when it finally came out? Welcome to our channel, where stories of betrayal come to life. Here, we want to be clear, we do not and will never support any form of cheating. These stories are fictional, created to show how betrayal can ruin lives, break hearts, and tear families apart. Get ready to dive into an intense and shocking story that will reveal how far lies and deceit can lead. Catch your breath, because what comes next will surprise you. Good story. The room was plunged into a comfortable gloom, illuminated only by the soft light escaping from the tall windows. There, in the large leather armchair, John Mitchell found himself lost in thought. He was a sober-looking man, his brown hair beginning to show the first strands of gray, a silent reminder of the years that had passed. John was 42 years old, sober and pragmatic, the type who rarely let his emotions slip to the surface, a trait that served him well during his rise as a successful financial consultant. Meticulous and organized, he always liked to have control, especially over his own life. In contrast, Emily was the outpouring of everything John was not. Vibrant with her brown hair falling in perfect waves and a smile that lit up any room, she always seemed willing to face life with an open mind. A visual artist and art teacher at a local school, she was a woman who expressed herself through colors and shapes, with a free spirit that contrasted with John's seriousness and methodical routine. At 38, Emily still had a curious look in her eyes, like every day was a new adventure to explore. To people on the outside, she and John looked like the perfect couple. They had a cozy home in a quiet neighborhood, with a backyard filled with sculptures and pottery Emily made herself. Every corner of their house told a story, like the sculpture of a tree twisting in unexpected ways and the hand-painted artwork on the walls. Their home was built on years of shared memories, laughter, and challenges, with moments of silence that spoke as much as words did. But, like any couple married for 10 years, they had their moments of tension. In the past few months, something had shifted between them. John wasn't sure when it started, but he felt it growing, like a small crack in a mirror. Emily, who had always been open and talkative, now seemed distant, lost in her thoughts and projects that kept her busy late into the night. He noticed how she smiled at her phone, as if it held a secret he wasn't part of. Little absences and small excuses started to add up, like crumpled paper piling around a trash bin. John tried to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase, but deep down he felt something was wrong. On her side, Emily felt a growing unease. There was a time when she and John were inseparable, able to talk for hours about anything and everything without noticing the time. But now, the connection felt broken, like a thread stretched too far and finally snapped. Conversations that used to be easy now felt forced, and the silences that were once comfortable now felt heavy and awkward. Every time she looked at John, she no longer saw the man she married, just a shadow of who he used to be. Over the past few months, Emily had buried herself even deeper in her work. Her classes at school were a welcome escape, a place where she could be the purest version of herself. She loved teaching, watching children explore their own creativity, watching their artwork take shape with a mix of enthusiasm and mayhem. But there was something beyond classes that kept her busy, something she still couldn't or didn't want to explain to John. She had become involved in a new project, a large commission mural for an art gallery, that required more than just her artistic skills. It demanded your attention, your soul. It was easy for John to rationalize this distance as a result of work. He knew how much the project meant to Emily. More than once, he entered the makeshift studio she had set up in the basement and found her concentrated, completely absorbed, as if nothing else in the world existed. And although he tried to participate, praising her work, suggesting colors and shapes, he felt his comments only scratched the surface. Emily, however, would just smile and say that he was being a good husband by caring, but that certain things were hard to explain. Summer was approaching, and with it a climate of renewal seemed to invade the city. John decided that perhaps it was time to try to rekindle the flame that had once warmed their relationship. He started planning small gestures, surprises that could bring some of that joy back. One day, after a business meeting, he stopped at a flower shop and bought a bouquet of red roses, the kind of romantic gesture he rarely made. He remembered how Emily used to smile when she received flowers, and he wanted to see that smile again, without the weight of a tiredness he couldn't identify. But when delivering the flowers, she thanked him with a distant, almost forced smile, and quickly returned to the cell phone that vibrated incessantly in her hand. And that's how the weeks went by, in a cycle of attempts to get closer on John's part and Emily's withdrawal. The feeling of inadequacy began to spread within him, a growing discomfort that he didn't know how to verbalize. He was beginning to realize that the small moments of happiness he tried to create couldn't cross the invisible barrier that had risen between them. Instead of words, there were silences. Instead of looks, there were diversions. One day, Emily told John she needed to travel for the weekend to an art conference. She said it was a rare opportunity, and she couldn't pass it up. John stayed quiet for a moment, thinking about what she said, then nodded. He thought maybe some time apart would be good for both of them, a chance to breathe and just maybe start fresh when she came back. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked as she packed her bags. "Yes, I will," she answered quickly, without looking at him. That night, John couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room for hours, staring at the lights outside the window, feeling like something was wrong, like a storm was coming, and he didn't know whether to run or face it. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to be in a quiet rush, moving with a sense of urgency that John didn't understand. She left early the next morning with a small suitcase and a smile he hadn't seen in a long time. On Sunday, John received an unexpected email, a confirmation of a scheduled delivery to an address he didn't recognize, something she had ordered and was scheduled to be delivered that very day. He found it strange, as it was unusual for her to ask for something to be delivered to a place other than home. Curiosity led him to investigate a little further, and what he found left him with a bitter taste in his mouth. That delivery, which seemed so innocent, would lead him to a revelation he wasn't prepared to face. But at that moment, all he could do was wait for an explanation that perhaps wouldn't make any difference. He wondered if, when she returned, things would be different, or if the void that grew between them would only expand until there was nothing left but memories of what they once were. The days following Emily's departure were marked by an oppressive silence in the house. John tried to occupy himself with work, immersing himself in reports and spreadsheets, but even so, his mind always wandered to that weekend, to the hurried way in which she had left. He wanted to believe that everything was normal, that things would adjust with time, but something continued to bother him, a feeling that there was something wrong, a missing piece in a puzzle that he still couldn't understand. On Monday afternoon, he received a short message from Emily saying she had arrived safely and that the conference was amazing. There were no photos, no enthusiastic messages about inspiring talks or meetings with other artists. As was typical of her when she participated in events like this, the message felt cold, as if it were a reminder that she was where she was supposed to be, and nothing more. John tried to ignore the discomfort, convincing himself that there was nothing to worry about. Still, he found himself staring at his phone, waiting for her to send one more message, anything that showed a little enthusiasm, a spark of what she used to be. The days went by slowly. John tried to stay busy by tidying up the house, doing simple tasks to take his mind off what felt wrong. But on Wednesday, while putting away laundry, he found a folded receipt in the pocket of one of Emily's dresses. It was from an expensive restaurant, far from the conference she was supposed to be at. He looked at the address and frowned, trying to remember when she had been there, but couldn't think of any time she had mentioned it. It was a small clue, but it planted doubt in his mind, even though he was trying hard to trust her. Still, John didn't want to believe there was something more going on. He put the receipt in his pocket and decided he would talk to Emily when she came back, but without making a scene. He wanted answers, but deep down, he still hoped it was just a misunderstanding, that there was a simple explanation that would dispel all his doubts. On Friday night, Emily returned. John was in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner, something she used to enjoy. He heard the door open and her light footsteps coming in, as if she was trying not to make any noise. She looked exhausted, but there was a sparkle in her eyes, one he hadn't seen in a while, and it made his stomach drop. She gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, muttering a hurried, before heading upstairs to her room, taking her suitcase with her. When she returned, they sat down to dinner and made small talk. Emily told her about the conference, the talks, the people she met, but there was something about the way she spoke that sounded rehearsed, almost like she was reading from a script. John listened, but he couldn't shake that feeling that something was wrong, that he was just hearing what she wanted him to hear. And then suddenly he asked, almost without thinking, "Did you go out to dinner somewhere special?" John asked. Emily hesitated for a moment, meeting his eyes before giving a forced smile. "Oh, yes, a colleague invited me to a restaurant. It was nice." John nodded, trying to hide the disappointment building inside. He expected her to say more, maybe mention the name of the restaurant or talk about what she had eaten, but she didn't. He didn't push it, not that night. He knew he needed more proof to confirm what he was starting to fear. On Saturday, John decided to act. He looked up the address on the receipt and found it was for a fancy restaurant, the kind Emily had always wanted to visit, but they never seemed to have the time. Out of curiosity, he checked the restaurant's website and looked at reservations for the past weekend. That's when he saw it, a photo of Emily, dressed up, sitting with a man he didn't recognize. They were smiling at the camera, raising their wine glasses like they were celebrating something special. John felt his world fall apart. This was the proof he had dreaded. He spent the rest of the afternoon not knowing what to do. His mind raced, but he couldn't think straight. He was angry, but more than that, he felt a deep sadness. Everything they had built together, their whole life, seemed to collapse in an instant. He knew he had to confront her, to understand why she had done this. That night, while Emily was watching TV in the living room, John walked in and turned off the television. She looked at him in surprise, but before she could say anything, he threw the receipt on the table. "Do you want to explain that?" he asked, his voice firm but shaky. She looked down at the paper and her face paled, her eyes widening for a brief second before regaining her composure. "It's just a receipt, John. I don't know why you're so nervous," she replied, but there was something in her voice that betrayed her attempt to remain calm. John knew she was lying. He took his cell phone out of his pocket and showed the photo he had found on the restaurant's website. "Is this just a receipt? Because it looks like you guys were having a lot of fun." Emily couldn't hold his gaze. She tried to speak, but the words died in her throat, and then John knew. She knew there was no going back, that she had crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. "What happened, Emily?" he asked, his voice breaking for the first time. "Why did you do that?" She took a deep breath, her eyes watering, but she didn't look away. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he whispered. It was a mistake, something that happened then, but she couldn't finish it. Because the truth was there, naked and raw, and she knew that any attempt at justification would sound empty. She tried to reach out her hand, but John took a step back, moving away from her as if the touch burned her. The silence that followed was crushing, filled with a pain neither of them knew how to express. John turned and left the room, leaving Emily standing there, alone. The tears finally fell, but he wasn't there to see them. He went upstairs and closed the bedroom door with a heavy thud, as if that sound confirmed something had broken forever. But he still didn't know the whole story, and what was coming would change their lives even more than the betrayal itself. The next morning, John woke up feeling a heavy weight on his chest, an overwhelming emptiness. He got out of bed, not sure what he was going to do that day, but he knew he needed answers. He had barely slept, tossing and turning, his mind full of questions and thoughts he couldn't control. Emily was still downstairs, likely thinking about how to explain herself or find a way out of the situation. But John knew that no matter what she said, words wouldn't be enough to heal the pain she had caused. The decision to confront her once again came when he heard light footsteps downstairs. John took a deep breath and went downstairs, finding her sitting at the kitchen table, her back to him, a cup of coffee in her hands. She didn't see him approach, and he had a brief moment to watch her, to see the outline of her figure, before everything fell apart once and for all. He had loved this woman with everything he had, and now it was as if he were looking at a stranger. "We need to talk," he said, with a firmness that surprised even himself. She turned around slowly, and he saw her eyes widen a little, as if she was preparing for a new round of justifications. She nodded, setting the cup aside, and waited. "What exactly do you want to talk about, John?" she asked, trying to remain calm, but the tension was palpable in her voice. John pulled out a chair and sat across from her, looking her straight in the eyes. "I want the truth," he said, each word coming out like a cut, sharp and precise. "No more excuses, no more half-truths. I know about the dinner, and there's no point in pretending it didn't happen. I want to know what is happening and why you did this." Emily was silent for a long moment, her lips pursing as if she was trying to find the right words. She knew she had no way out. She knew that any lie would be useless. "I was confused, John," she began, but he interrupted her, shaking his head. "No, don't give me that. You weren't confused. You knew exactly what you were doing. So please, just tell me the truth." She took a deep breath, and her hand started to shake a little. John noticed, and it made him even more frustrated. He didn't want her to hide behind excuses. He wanted her to admit it, to take responsibility for what she had done. "I met someone, and," she started, but he cut her off. "I already know that," he said, his voice rising, full of anger. "I saw the photos. You don't need to tell me what I already know. I need to know what you're hiding, Emily. Why are you acting like this? Why does it feel like you're trying to get away from me?" She hesitated, and for the first time, John saw something new in her eyes. It wasn't fear or guilt. It was more like panic. He realized there was something bigger she was hiding, something more than just cheating. "John, it's not that simple," she said finally, her voice shaky. "I didn't want you to find out like this, but I was planning on leaving, not only because of what happened, but because I received a job offer. It's an opportunity in another state, something I always wanted, and I didn't know how to tell you." For a moment, John was in shock. He blinked, trying to absorb what she had just said. "Were you planning to leave?" he repeated, as if the words were too absurd to understand. "So, the plan was to leave me for him. Is that it?" She shook her head desperately. "That's not it, John. It's not just because of him. This proposal is important to me. It's a chance to do something big with my career, something I've always dreamed of. But yes, me too. I also got involved with him, and you were going to leave me and move on as if nothing had happened," he added, and the tone of his voice was a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Would you just go on with your life? Start from scratch somewhere else? Without even giving me a decent explanation?" She tried to respond, but her words were drowned out by the intensity of the moment. John stood up, unable to sit still. He began pacing back and forth, hands on his head, trying to understand how it had all come to this. "I can't believe you would leave me like that, without even telling me," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "John, I know it sounds cruel, and maybe it is. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But I didn't see a future for us anymore," she confessed, and her words felt like stabs. "I felt trapped, suffocated, and I didn't know how to tell you." He stopped walking and looked at her, his eyes filled with pain and frustration. "So, this is how you fix it? Do you feel trapped and decide to date another man? How does this make sense to you, Emily?" She didn't know how to respond. His hands were still shaking, and she could see how much her words had hurt him. But there was something more she needed to say, something she didn't know how to say, and that could change everything for good. She had tried to keep it hidden, thought she could resolve it on her own, but now it was clear that there was no way. She began, her voice breaking, but she forced herself to continue. "I received the proposal, yes. But he's not going with me, John. He was never really a part of my plan. I just needed a way out, and he was there offering me something I didn't know how to refuse." John frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" he asked, stopping walking and looking at her. "If he's not part of your plans, then why would you?" She hesitated, and then it all came out at once, as if she could hold it in no longer. "Because he is the head of the company that made me the offer. He used this proposal to manipulate me, John. I didn't want it to be like this, but I got involved with him, and now I'm stuck in this situation. He made me believe that if I didn't accept it, there would be no other chance. And I was desperate. I wanted this opportunity so much that I ended up. She stopped, her voice cracking as tears formed in her eyes. John was silent, trying to process what she had said. He had always known she was passionate about her work and had dreams that might be bigger than what he could offer. But hearing that she had been manipulated and used was too much for him. "So, you traded our marriage for a lie?" he asked, his voice low and shaking. "Did you let yourself be fooled by someone who just wanted to use you?" "I didn't know it would be like this," Emily replied, her voice breaking. "I thought it was a chance, and by the time I realized what I had gotten into, it was too late. I thought I could handle it alone, that I could get out of it, but—" She began to cry, and her mask finally fell away. John felt something shift inside him. He realized that despite everything, she was scared and desperate. And for the first time in a long time, he saw the truth in her eyes. But the pain didn't go away. Her words only added to the chaos inside him. He wanted to believe there was a way out, an explanation that could make sense of what she had done. But the betrayal was right there, raw and painful, and he didn't know how to handle it. "You were ready to leave me for a life that wasn't even real," he murmured, and each word felt heavy like a stone. "And now, what's left for us?" John was quiet for a moment, still trying to take in everything he had heard. Emily's revelations had shattered any hope he had of finding a simple reason for her betrayal. It wasn't just a matter of infidelity, it was a web of manipulations, desperate choices, and a tangle of lies that threatened to swallow everything around them. As the truth unfolded, he found himself faced with a dilemma that seemed unbearable. Try to forgive and salvage something of what was left of the marriage, or accept that there was nothing left to do but move on alone. Emily's breathing was ragged, as if each sigh was an effort to maintain her composure. She wiped her tears with the back of her hands, still shaking. "I never wanted to hurt you like this," she said, almost in a whisper, as if her own voice betrayed her. "I didn't expect everything to get out of control. The proposal, he seemed so sincere, so interested in helping me grow, and then he used you," John interrupted, his voice firm but filled with pain. "And you left. You left because you needed a way out, because you didn't want to deal with the reality that something was wrong between us. And now I'm here trying to understand how we got to this." Emily lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. "I know I was wrong, John. I know this all sounds like excuses, and maybe they are, but I wanted this chance so badly to do something big, to be someone, and I thought I could handle whatever came next. I thought I could get out of this without hurting anyone. I was naive." There was a weight to his words, a sadness that almost seemed sincere, but to John it made no difference. The truth had been exposed, and it was much uglier than he could have ever imagined. She not only betrayed him, but let herself be drawn into a dangerous game, a game in which she was just a pawn. It made him just as angry as it did sad. "And now," he asked, his tone almost challenging, "what do you expect me to do? Pretend nothing happened? Keep waiting while you figure out what life you want?" Emily looked at him, tears in her eyes, searching for an answer she didn't have. She knew she couldn't ask for forgiveness and expect it to be enough. She realized that any promise now would just sound empty, a desperate attempt to fix something that was already broken. "I don't know, John," she admitted, her fragile voice filling the room with a heavy sadness. "I just wanted you to know that it wasn't just about you. It was about me, about the things I felt I needed, and I never got to talk about it with you." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "So you just decided to leave because talking to me seemed harder than getting involved with another man? Is that what you're saying? That I was the problem, and the solution was to replace me?" She hesitated before responding. "No, it wasn't about replacing you, John. I know this seems ridiculous now, but I was trying to find something I had lost, something I thought I couldn't have here. But I realized that in the end, I didn't want to live a lie. And when he made me the offer to go along, I realized I couldn't continue with that." The revelation took John by surprise. "Proposal to go along," he repeated, confused. "Did he want you to go with him?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, he offered me a position, promised it would be a new life, away from everything. But I said no. I knew that if I accepted, there would be no going back, and even after everything, I couldn't do it. I couldn't destroy everything like that." "But you destroyed it," John retorted, pain showing in his voice. Maybe you didn't leave with him, but that doesn't change the fact that you chose to cheat. You didn't think about us, not even for a second. She was silent because she knew he was right. Every excuse she tried to come up with to justify her actions fell apart in the face of the harsh reality of what she had done. She looked at him, hoping to find some compassion in his eyes, something that showed he still wanted to save their relationship. But all she found was a coldness she had never seen before, and it scared her. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if it's possible to fix it, but I still want to try. I want to try to make things right." John took a deep breath, and for the first time, he felt an overwhelming tiredness. He felt like he was carrying a weight that wasn't just from the betrayal, but from all the years, all the attempts and failures that had silently accumulated between them. "And what would it mean to make things right?" he asked, almost emotionlessly. "Let me decide what happens now. Do you think you can just clean up what you did and start again?" She knew she had no right to ask for that, but part of her still hoped there was a chance, however small it was. "I know I can't change what happened, and I know that asking for forgiveness isn't enough," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. Even if it means," John raised his hand, stopping her. "Even if it means what, Emily? Do you want me to believe that you are now willing to sacrifice anything to save what is left? Because, honestly, I don't know what else is left to save." She hung her head, feeling crushed by the weight of her own choices. "I didn't want to lose you," she whispered, and her words hung in the air, fragile and desperate. "I was lost and I made bad choices, but I still love you, John. Even if it doesn't seem like it, even if it doesn't make sense right now." He stared at her for a long moment, trying to understand if there was still something there worth fighting for. He wanted to feel angry. He wanted to scream at her, but all he could feel was a deep sadness, a feeling that everything they had built had become unrecognizable. And then he realized that the question was no longer about whether or not to forgive, but about finding a way to move on, even if it meant leaving her behind. And the simplicity of that sentence carried all the pain he had repressed. "Not after all this. And I don't think you really love me, Emily. I think you're just trying to find something to fill the empty space in your life. And I can't be that for you." The silence that followed was heartbreaking. Emily knew he was right. Something in their love had been lost and worn away over the years. Now, when she needed it the most, she couldn't find a way to bring it back. John realized that, no matter how much he wanted to, there might be no way to recover what they had lost. She tried to reach out to him again, but he pulled back, and that gesture made her face a truth she was afraid to accept. "I think we need time," he said, his voice tired and almost defeated. "I need time to understand all of this, and you need to find out who you really are without trying to drag me into the chaos you created." And with that, he stood up, leaving her alone in the kitchen, the silence expanding around her like a cold, unforgiving shadow. Her words, her promises of change, of redemption, no longer carried any weight. All that was left was dark uncertainty, and the hope that somehow time could bring an answer that neither of them knew how to find at that moment. The days that followed were a mixture of silence and distance. John and Emily lived under the same roof, but as if they were strangers who shared a space out of obligation. The house that was once a refuge, full of memories of happy times, now felt suffocating. The pictures of Emily on the wall seemed to stare at John like silent witnesses of a love lost. Her basement studio was deserted, and the flowers in the garden were beginning to fade, as if reflecting the state of their lives. John made a decision, something that gnawed at him inside, but that seemed inevitable. He scheduled a meeting with a lawyer to begin the divorce process. He had tried as much as he could to find a way to overcome everything that had happened, but he realized that this meant giving up something he could no longer ignore, his own dignity. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life wondering what Emily would do next, always wondering if he could trust her again. The day he signed the papers, John left the lawyer's office with a feeling of relief, but also of loss. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but the void left behind was incalculable. He knew he was doing what was right for him, But that didn't lessen the sadness of seeing a marriage of so many years fall apart. He stopped at a cafe, sat at the table, and stared at the slowly cooling cup of coffee. There was no celebration, there was no feeling of victory. Just a chapter that needed to close so that another, uncertain one, could begin. Emily received notifications from her lawyer and knew the end was coming. She had tried to talk to John several times, but each attempt ended in arguments or painful silences. She wanted to explain and help him understand that, no matter how many mistakes she had made, a part of her still loved him and wanted another chance. But deep down, she knew that chance would never come. She had risked everything for a promise that turned out to be empty, and now she was paying for her choices. In a final attempt to save something, Emily went to John's work. He was leaving the office when he saw her standing across the street, looking like a shadow of her former self. He hesitated for a moment, then crossed the street to her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice tired. "I needed to see you," she replied, trying not to let her voice waver. "I needed to say I'm sorry. And I know I've said this before, but I'm leaving. I accepted the job offer. I'm moving to another state. I think it's best for both of us." John was silent, digesting the words. Part of him felt relief to hear that she was walking away, that there would be no more confrontations, no more attempts to justify the unjustifiable. But part of him also felt a tightness in his chest, as if this were the end point of something he hadn't yet fully accepted. "So, that's it," he said finally. "You will move on and leave everything behind." Emily lowered her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I know I failed you in every way possible. But I want you to know that, as much as I lost myself, I never wanted to hurt you like that. I'm going to try to find a new life, something that makes me feel less lost. And I just hope that one day you can find someone who makes you truly happy, because you deserve it." John heard those words, and for the first time, he didn't feel angry, just a deep sadness. He realized that there was nothing more to be said, that Emily's apology was all she had to offer, and that he needed to find a way to move forward without holding on to a past that could never be repaired. He left her there, feeling like this would be the last time they would see each other. A few weeks later, Emily packed her things and left. The change felt like a bitter new beginning, an escape disguised as a fresh start. She accepted the job offer, but she knew it wasn't because she was ambitious or hopeful for growth. It was just what she had left, a way to get away from the chaos her life had become. She moved to a new city where no one knew her past and tried to rebuild her identity. But even with her new job and routines, there was an emptiness that followed her, a feeling that she could never escape the consequences of her actions. On the other hand, John had finally started to adjust to single life. He sold the house they had shared, no longer wanting to hold on to the memories it contained. He moved to a smaller apartment, closer to work, and began to find a new rhythm. He threw himself into work, not as an escape, but as a way to find a purpose that didn't involve the wounds left by his failed relationship. Little by little, he started going out with friends again, attending events he had avoided for so long. And surprisingly, he found peace in being alone. Loneliness was no longer a threat, but an opportunity to rediscover oneself. One autumn afternoon, while walking through a park, John received a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but for some reason, he decided to listen. On the other end of the line, a gentle, feminine voice introduced itself. She was a coworker of Emily's. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I thought you'd like to know. Emily asked me to get in touch. She wanted me to tell you that she got the opportunity she wanted so much, but that she deeply regrets everything that happened." John was silent for a moment, processing the words. "Is she okay?" he asked, not knowing exactly why those words came out. The voice on the other end hesitated. "She's trying, you know. I think she's trying to find a way to move on. Maybe that's the best thing she can do now." John thanked him and hung up the phone. He kept walking through the park, looking at the fallen leaves on the ground. He realized that despite everything, he had found a way to move on. The wounds were still there, but they were starting to heal, and he no longer had to carry the burden of the past with him. He hoped that Emily would also find peace and could turn her mistakes into something better. But he knew that wasn't his concern anymore. He had left that part of his life behind, and now, finally, he was free to start over. Second story. The situation involving Julia. Julia's best friend is Clark, and Clark's brother is Nathan. Julia received a phone call from a girl who said she had been with Julia's boyfriend for over a year. This same girl had also dated Nathan, Clark's brother. The caller spent about an hour talking to Julia and shared some general details about Julia's boyfriend. However, these details could have easily been found on social media. When Julia asked for proof, the girl couldn't give any specific information about her boyfriend. Julia confronted her boyfriend, and he looked her in the eyes, insisting that it wasn't true. It's important to mention that neither Julia nor I had ever felt uneasy about him before. There were no warning signs. He genuinely seems to care for her. While Julia wants to trust her boyfriend, she can't completely ignore what the girl said, and I feel the same way. Julia then decided to ask Nathan if he knew who the caller was. Nathan said that while the caller wants to avoid drama, he thinks the claims could be true. Now, everything feels confusing. Who can we trust in this situation? I'm just as confused as Julia is, and I wonder why this girl wants to stay anonymous without any real proof. But it is true that cheating happens all the time,